Hello everyone, welcome to the course on Pearls from the Deep. This video is meant to be an overview of this course that you have to study as part of your common course syllabus. So, I am basically trying to help you understand how to have that frame of mind to study literature, to understand literary works. That is the aim of this presentation. So before we begin, let's begin with this question, what is literature? I want you to think about that, or rather think about the question, why should you think about what is literature? As I've already told you, this is a common course that both students from science stream and art stream study. It's a compulsory course for you. So some of you might be coming from a science background. So I thought it's important to understand and have that right attitude towards learning literary works or towards literature. There is a difference between the way you approach literary works and the way you approach science. While science is an objective field of study where you focus on clear-cut answers, where your focus is on finding singular answers to the questions that science brings towards you. On the other hand, when you come to literature or literary works, there is no such condition. The text that you have to study, like whether it's a poem or a play or a novel or a short story, whatever that is, it's just open before you to read, to enjoy, and to come up with your own ideas of interpreting those texts. It's about appreciating art. It's about finding your own meanings from a particular piece of work. So, I want you to relax as you go through these stories, as you go through these literary works. Have a relaxed frame of mind and come up with your own ideas apart from the ones given in the lectures or even in your textbook or even the reference books. You can have your own views on these works. So, a basic question like this might have an answer like this. Literature includes literary works which are written works. Any written work can be considered as literature. Now, what is the purpose of studying literature? What is the purpose for science students particularly to have a course like this? Now, Philip Sidney is a literary critic and a famous poet from the 16th century. In his famous work titled Apology for Poetry, Sidney talks about the purpose, the two main purposes of literature. The one is to teach, the other is to delight, to teach and delight. Although he talks about this idea in the context of poetry, you can extend it to understanding literature as a whole as well. You might agree with me that you study literature or you read a piece of work to have a sense of delight or to experience pleasure or to enjoy and be in that fictional world that the writer presents before you, right? When you might have read any novel, at least one novel in your lifetime. So I'm sure that when you read a novel, you're drawn into that world, you visualize these characters and the events that the writer describes in these works. And once you finish reading that, you feel relaxed, you feel that you have enjoyed that act of reading. That's the element of delight that Sidney talks about. At the same time, by the end of this process of reading a novel or a poem or whatever that be, you also gain some sort of an information. You also gain some sort of wisdom in very subtle ways. You don't know how you gain that information like science does. Science might give you information in bullet points, very clear-cut information. But the wisdom that you gain through reading literary works takes place naturally without even you noticing it. So that is also the purpose of studying or reading literature, that you learn about human life, you learn about the psychology of the human mind through the characters that you come across in these literary works. Literary genres is also important to understand this in the context of studying this course. Genre definitely means categories. You might be familiar with various genres in the context of movies or films. The same way we have genres and categories. And in literature, these are basically divided into three different genres. The first one is poetry, second prose, and finally plays or drama. It's 3 P's, so it's easy to remember. And even in this course, you will come across each of these types of literary works. This is a basic overview of all the lessons that are prescribed for you in this course. It's divided into 4 different modules. This is how you will find the lessons in the e-learning platform. The first module will be a module on poetry. You have over 9 poems to study. You have the second module, which is the prose section, which might include, prose generally includes fiction and non-fiction, but here these are all short fiction for you to study. The third module is the play part or the drama, which is basically 1-act plays. You have 3 plays in that module. And finally, you have a short novel by the celebrated novelist Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. We'll move on to the first module, a basic overview of what it's about, what each of these poems are about. The first poem, The Chance of Humming by Rumi, is a poem about the philosophy of life. We are talking about pearls from the deep. We are talking about understanding poems and also valuing the pearls of wisdom that you gain from reading these literary works. So here, when you read Rumi's poems, the Persian poet, it may appear like a story about a man journeying through a river, and it might look simplistic, but we'll get into the details of the philosophy that is embedded within the poem, the philosophy of life. It's a philosophy of life that Rumi presents, where he motivates its readers to live in the present rather than being burdened by the past regrets and guilts of life. Right? That is the very first poem. You have 2 different poems that are based on the concept of medieval knighthood. 2 poems about knights. You might have heard about the Knights of the Round Table. These are famous characters from medieval writing, from ballads. They are basically soldiers who have sworn to protect the land, the king, and the people. And they have a special affection for women whom they consider as the weaker sex. So here you find the first poem by Sir Walter Scott titled Lochinvar is about one such brave knight who goes through all odds of life, who overcomes all difficulties to prove his bravery in a way. You have another knight presented by the celebrated romantic poet John Keats in the poem La Belle Dame Sans Merci. There you find a knight who is different from Lochinvar, who suffers from the loss of love that he experiences. There's a poem by the celebrated nature poet, American poet Robert Frost, After Apple Picking. There also, the poem looks like a photographic image of a man plucking apples during the harvest season. It might look very simplistic, but again, as it's commonly said about Frost's poetry, it begins in delight, but it ends in wisdom. The same way, Frost in this poem as well talks about life, death, afterlife, about perseverance and hard work. We'll deal with each of these themes as we go through the poem. This is one of my favorite poems from this module, Chinua Achebe's A Refugee Mother and Child. Chinua Achebe is a Nigerian novelist, particularly famous for his novels, but this is a poem that he wrote based on a real-life experience that he had when he visited one of the refugee camps in Biafra in Nigeria. And this is mostly a recollection of a scene that he saw there, where he happened to meet a mother with a child in the camp. He talks about all the struggles that they have to go through in the camp, but still Achebe finds that pearl there, the pearl of affection, motherly affection between these two characters. And the love that a mother has for a child, even in the midst of struggles, even in the midst of poverty, hunger, even when she knows that her child is about to die, she has a ghost smile on her face, says Achebe. That's one of the poems that you have to study here. You will be introduced to Kamala Das, or Madhavi Kuti as we know her, and her poem My Grandmother's House is also part of your syllabus, where she longs for her grandmother who is no more, and she feels that it's her grandmother who taught her how to love from the heart. And she kind of longs for that kind of innocent, childlike affection, which she does not find in the modern world. You have a poem by Ted Hughes, popularly known as an animal poet. He's written so many poems about animals and birds. So this one is titled Jaguar. We'll get into the details as we go through each of these lessons. We have a poem by the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, one of his most celebrated poems, Tonight I Can Write the Saddest Lines. He's a celebrated poet for his affection for themes like love and also revolution and political issues. Here is a poem where he talks about the experience of love and betrayal and loss and how he traverses each of these feelings and emotions. It's beautifully put out in this particular poem of his. And finally, you have a very simple poem by the Malayali poet P.P. Ramachandran titled How Simple. And that's about a simple bird, a small bird that he observes, and he tries to connect the life of this bird with that of the human beings. He feels that the bird lives a very simple, unsophisticated life and serves the purpose of its life, whatever it does. It's happy, it's content. But that's not the case with the human world. The humans complicate things and they have a complex lifestyle and still unsatisfied. So that is the poem How Simple by P.P. Ramachandran. Coming to the prose part, you have 4 different short fiction. The first one is by the celebrated French writer, often called the master of short story, Guy de Maupassant, and his work titled Two Friends. This was originally published in French as Deux Amis, where it's all about the friendship between two characters at the outset, of course, but there are layers of complexity woven into the tale, which is written in the context of the Franco-Prussian War of the 1870s. Coming to the second one, The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry is another brilliant piece of work which is prescribed for you. O. Henry is well known for the plot twist that he incorporates into his short stories. So here also you have a lovely couple, Della and Jim, who goes through certain difficulties in life and how the sacrificial love that they share helps them overcome all these feelings of sorrow and trouble that they go through. You have a story titled Sparrows by K.A. Abbas, which is about an ordinary villager named Rahim Khan. Again, the story might seem simplistic, but the story brilliantly exposes the kind of prejudices, the kind of biases that society frames for each individual based on their behavior, based on their personal appearance. But the writer wants us to understand characters in a nuanced way, where the character Rahim Khan is placed before us for our analysis, where you understand that he becomes who he is based on certain past experiences, certain past difficulties that he had to undergo. That's the reason for the molding of his personality the way you would find it in the story, which we'll discuss in detail in the lectures. And finally, you have a story by Flora Annie Steele titled Valiant Vicky. There also it's about an Indian villager named Vicky. and who happens to weave unbelievable stories about his life. And Annie Steele is trying to present to us how fate and circumstances and situation determine failures or success. And what's the element of truth in that? How do we look at people who are successful at everything that they do? Is there another layer behind that? That's what Flora Annie Steele explores in that short story. Coming to the drama, you have 3 plays this time. The first one is titled Trifles by Susan Glaspell. Trifles, a word, is related to the word trivial, meaning silly or insignificant. And she explains how certain trivial things in life may become important. And why do we consider certain people and certain things as trivial or insignificant? Is there a bias there? That's what she explores. Coming to the second play, The Refugee by Asif Karim Boy. Again, set in the historical context of the partition and the formation of Bangladesh. And there it's about, as the title reveals, it's about a refugee and the identity crisis that a refugee undergoes. A refugee is someone who's forced out of their homeland, not because of anything that they did, but because of other situations and other factors that are beyond their control. And these refugees, when they go to a different country, there again they are strangers. They can't go back to their homeland, and they are strangers in this new land. So the crisis that they feel is very well explained in this play by Asif Karim Boy. And finally, you have a very interesting play titled Boy Comes Home by A.A. Milne, which is a humorous play but dealing with a serious theme, that of war and how war affects the younger generation. And it also discusses certain complicated topics and themes that of generation gap and so on. And finally, you have a short novel by Charles Dickens, one of the greatest writers of the Victorian age, titled A Christmas Carol. You must be already familiar with this work because it has been adapted into movies, into plays and so on. But we will be looking particularly at the relationships that you find in this play. And as you read through these works, as you go through these literary works, I sincerely hope that you would find those pearls of wisdom that are hidden within each of these works. Thank you. Happy learning.